I still remember the smell of that turkey burning in the oven while my world fell apart around the dining room table. The acrid smoke mixed with expensive candles and my own fierce sweat created this nauseating cocktail that I can still taste when I think about that night. It was Thanksgiving 2023, and I thought I was finally home. After 28 years of searching for where I belonged, I believed I'd found it with Marcus and his family. How wrong I was. My name is Elena Vasquez, and this is the story of how one dinner destroyed my life and rebuilt it into something I never imagined possible. But to understand why that Thanksgiving hurt so much, you need to know what it meant to me to finally have a family dinner to attend. Growing up in foster care teaches you to be grateful for scraps, a kind word from a caseworker, a foster parent who remembers your birthday, a placement that lasts more than 6 months. I learned early that wanting too much, expecting too much, was a luxury I couldn't afford. Let me start from the beginning, because context matters in a story like this. I grew up in foster care in Detroit, bouncing between homes like a pinball until I aged out at 18. No family photos on the mantle, no grandmother's recipes, no cousin who looked like me. Just me, a sociology degree I earned through pure stubbornness and a heart that kept hoping someone, somewhere, would claim me as their own. The longest I ever stayed anywhere was 2 years with Elena Martinez, not a coincidence that we shared a name. She was this fierce little Puerto Rican woman who ran a group home on the east side, and she didn't just house us, she loved us. When I was 16 and angry at the world, she'd sit me down at her kitchen table and say, "Mija, being unwanted doesn't make you unworthy. Sometimes the family that's supposed to love you fails, but that doesn't mean you're broken." I wish I'd held onto those words better. Maybe then I wouldn't have been so desperate to prove my worth to people who had already decided I didn't have any. Elena Martinez died of cancer 2 months before I graduated high school, and I've carried her memory like a talisman ever since. Her sweet potato casserole recipe, written in her shaky handwriting on an index card yellowed with age, was one of the few things I took with me when I left the system. When I met Marcus Richardson at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago 3 years ago, he seemed like everything I'd never dared to dream of. Tall, confident, with these warm brown eyes that crinkled when he laughed. But more than that, he had something I'd never experienced firsthand, a family. I remember our first real conversation like it was yesterday. I was sitting alone at a corner table, grading papers from the after-school program where I worked, when this guy in an expensive suit accidentally knocked over my coffee while rushing to grab his order. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," he said, immediately grabbing napkins and trying to save my paperwork. "Please tell me these aren't important." "Just some kids' essays about their heroes," I said, dabbing coffee off a paper where 8-year-old Miguel had written about his grandmother. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, reading about other people's heroes while mine was a memory written on a recipe card. "Let me buy you another coffee," he said. "And maybe dinner to make up for ruining your evening?" I should have said no. I should have seen the expensive watch, the tailored suit, the easy confidence that comes from never having to wonder if you're good enough, and known we were from different worlds. But when he smiled at me, really smiled, like I was someone worth getting to know, I forgot about all of that. "Okay," I said. "But somewhere with good coffee. I'm very particular about my caffeine." That first dinner stretched into 4 hours of conversation that felt like coming up for air after holding my breath my whole life. He told me about his work at the Family Foundation, about growing up in Lincoln Park, about Sunday dinners where 3 generations gathered around the same table his great-grandfather had built. I told him about foster care, about working with kids who reminded me of myself, about the community center where I ran programs for teenagers aging out of the system. I expected him to get that look, the one people get when they realize you're one of those kids, the ones with sad stories and complicated backgrounds. Instead, his eyes got soft with something that looked like admiration. "You're incredible," he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "The way you've built a life, a career, a purpose out of. I mean, most people who go through what you went through. Most people who go through what I went through don't make it this far," I finished for him. "I know. I'm one of the lucky ones." "No," he said firmly. "Lucky implies it was chance. What you've accomplished, who you've become, that's not luck. That's strength." I fell in love with him right there, in that moment, when he saw my past not as damage to be overlooked but as evidence of who I really was. The Richardsons weren't just a family, they were an institution. Old Chicago money, the kind that came from steel and railroads and smart investments. Marcus's great-grandfather had built the company that still bore their name. Their house in Lincoln Park wasn't just a home, it was a monument to 5 generations of success. "My family's going to love you," Marcus had told me on our third date, his hand warm over mine as we shared dessert. "You're exactly what this family needs, some fresh perspective, some real heart." I believed him. God, how I believed him. The first few family gatherings were like stepping into a Norman Rockwell painting, if Norman Rockwell had painted families that lived in houses worth more than entire city blocks. Sunday dinners where everyone actually showed up, holiday traditions that went back decades, inside jokes that made everyone laugh until they cried. Marcus's mother, Patricia Richardson, would kiss my cheek and tell me how wonderful it was to have another daughter. His father, William, would ask about my work at the community center with what seemed like genuine interest, nodding thoughtfully as I described our programs. But even then, there were moments that should have warned me. Like the first time Patricia asked me to help in the kitchen and I instinctively knew to wash my hands before touching anything, having learned in group homes that cleanliness was survival. "Oh, how thoughtful," she said, but her tone had this slight edge of surprise, like she was making a mental note about something. Or the way Caroline, Marcus's sister, would introduce me to people. "This is Elena, Marcus's girlfriend." Always that tiny pause before girlfriend, like she was searching for a more temporary word. I told myself it was natural adjustment period. I told myself they needed time to get used to having someone new in their established dynamic. I told myself that families this close-knit were probably protected by nature. His sister Caroline seemed a little cooler, but I attributed that to her being protective of her baby brother. His older brother David was always polite, if distant. I thought it was just the natural adjustment period. I thought I was being slowly absorbed into this warm, loving family unit. I was so desperate to belong somewhere that I missed all the signs. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. The way Patricia's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. How Caroline would make subtle comments about family traditions and keeping things in the family whenever I suggested changes or improvements to their holiday routines. The worst part was how good I got at making excuses for them. When Patricia forgot to include me in the family group chat about Easter plans, I told myself she was just old-fashioned about technology. When Caroline's children seemed coached in how to interact with me, polite but distant, I convinced myself they were just shy around new people. When William would change the subject whenever I asked about family history or traditions, I assumed he was just being modest about their legacy. Looking back, I can see how perfectly orchestrated it all was. They gave me just enough inclusion to keep me grateful, just enough warmth to keep me hoping, just enough family feeling to keep me trying harder. But Marcus loved me, and I loved him. When he proposed on Christmas morning, surrounded by all of them, I cried tears of joy that had nothing to do with the ring and everything to do with finally having a family to call my own. The ring itself should have been another warning. It was his grandmother's engagement ring, a beautiful Art Deco piece that Patricia presented to Marcus during their gift exchange. "It's been waiting for the right woman," she said, handing it to Marcus with ceremony. "My mother-in-law wore it for 63 years of marriage. It's seen a lot of love." When Marcus got down on one knee and slipped it onto my finger, everyone applauded and cried and took pictures. But later, when I was helping clean up, I overheard Caroline talking to her aunt in the kitchen. "I can't believe Mom gave him Grandma's ring," Caroline was saying in a voice tight with disapproval. "Well, it's not like it's going to stay in the family," her aunt replied. "These things have a way of working themselves out." I pretended not to hear, pretended the words didn't chill me to the bone. But I held onto Marcus's hand a little tighter for the rest of the evening. "Welcome to the family, sweetheart," Patricia had said, hugging me tight. The words I'd waited my whole life to hear. We set the wedding for October 2024. I threw myself into planning with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never had a reason to dream about weddings before. Patricia offered to help, insisting we use the family's longtime event planner, their preferred caterer, their connections for everything from flowers to photography. "It's tradition," she'd say whenever I suggested alternatives. "Richardson women have always done things a certain way." I was so grateful to be included in that tradition that I didn't realize I was being erased from my own wedding. The guest list was 90% Richardson family and friends. The menu featured dishes I'd never heard of and some I was actually allergic to. When I mentioned wanting to incorporate some elements from my Latino heritage, maybe a mariachi band, or some traditional foods, Patricia gently but firmly redirected the conversation. "Oh darling, we want to keep things cohesive," she'd say. "Maybe for the rehearsal dinner?" The rehearsal dinner that never happened because we decided to keep things simple. But I was marrying into this family, and I wanted to fit in. I swallowed my disappointment and focused on the future. Once I was officially a Richardson, things would be different. I'd have more say, more influence. I'd truly be one of them. The wedding was beautiful, I'll give them that. Everything executed perfectly, every detail flawless. As I walked down that aisle, I felt like I was walking into the life I'd always dreamed of. Marcus looked handsome in his tuxedo, his whole family beaming with pride in the front row. But even on my wedding day, there were moments that stung. Like when the photographer was taking family photos and kept arranging shots with the Richardson family before remembering to include me. Or when Patricia's toast focused entirely on how proud she was of the young man Marcus has become without mentioning me at all. Or when multiple guests came up to me asking about my family, and I had to keep explaining that I didn't have any relatives there. "Oh, how sad," they'd say, with that particular look of pity mixed with discomfort. "Well, you're a Richardson now." But was I? Even as I signed the marriage certificate, even as I officially took their name, something deep in my gut whispered that I was still an outsider looking in. The worst moment came during the father-daughter dance. I watched other brides dance with their fathers, saw the tears and the laughter and the obvious love, and felt that familiar hollow ache of not having anyone to share that moment with. William Richardson noticed me standing alone and kindly offered to dance with me, but even his kindness felt like charity. "Welcome to the family, Elena," he said as we swayed to the music. "I hope you know how much you mean to all of us." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. During the reception, William Richardson stood up to give a toast that brought tears to my eyes. "Elena," he said, raising his glass, "you're not gaining a family today. You're completing ours. We couldn't have asked for a better daughter-in-law, and we can't wait to see what the future holds for all of us." I felt so loved, so accepted, so home. The honeymoon in Italy was perfect. Marcus was attentive and romantic, and for 2 weeks, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. We talked about our future, about the children we'd have, about growing old together in that big house in Lincoln Park that would someday be ours. "I want our kids to have what I had," Marcus told me as we watched the sunset from our hotel balcony in Positano. That sense of belonging, of continuity. Family recipes and family stories and family traditions passed down through generations. "They will," I promised him, my head on his shoulder. "We'll make sure of it." When we got back to Chicago, we moved into a beautiful apartment in River North that Marcus's parents had given us as a wedding gift. It was gorgeous, hardwood floors, huge windows overlooking the city, more space than I'd ever lived in. But it was temporary, Patricia assured me. "Once you have children, you'll want to be closer to family," she said during one of our weekly lunches. "There's plenty of room in the main house, and the children will want to be around their grandparents." The main house. That's how she always referred to the Richardson family estate, a sprawling property in Lincoln Park that had been in the family for 4 generations. It wasn't just a house, it was the family seat, the center of everything Richardson. I started spending more time there, especially on weekends. Patricia would invite me over for girl time, shopping trips, spa days, long lunches where she'd tell me stories about the family history. I was hungry for these stories, these connections to something bigger than myself. She told me about Marcus's great-great-grandmother, who'd started the family's charitable foundation. About his grandfather, who'd served in World War II and came home to triple the family business. About the traditions they'd maintained through wars and recessions and social changes. "Family is everything, Elena," she'd say, squeezing my hand. "It's the only thing that really matters in this world. Blood, commitment, legacy, that's what makes a family strong." I nodded along, absorbing every word like gospel. This was what I'd missed growing up in foster care. This sense of continuity, of belonging to something larger than yourself. But there were moments that gave me pause, moments when the mask slipped just enough for me to see what was underneath. Like when Caroline made a comment about how some people just don't understand family loyalty after I mentioned missing one of their Sunday dinners for a work emergency. I'd been coordinating crisis intervention for a teenager who'd been kicked out by his foster family, but when I tried to explain, Caroline just shrugged. Family comes first, she said. That's just how we were raised. The implication was clear. I hadn't been raised that way because I hadn't been raised by family at all. Or when David asked if I planned to keep working at that little community center after I had children, as if my career was just a hobby I'd outgrow once I started producing Richardson Heirs. It's just that the foundation work is so demanding, he said when I looked taken aback. And Mom's getting older. She'll need help managing all the family obligations. Family obligations. Like I was being interviewed for a position I hadn't applied for. But the most telling moment came during a casual conversation with Patricia about holiday traditions. I'd suggested that maybe we could incorporate some Latino customs into Christmas, perhaps making tamales together or having a small Noche Buena celebration. Patricia's smile was so tight it looked painful. Oh darling, that's sweet, but Richardson traditions have been in place for so long. It would be complicated to change things now. And we wouldn't want to confuse the children about what's truly important to our family. What's truly important to our family? Not what's important to me, her daughter-in-law. What's important to their family, which I apparently wasn't really part of. Marcus always defended me when I brought these things up, but he also minimized them. They're just protective, he'd say. You're changing the family dynamic, and that takes some adjustment. Give them time. So I gave them time. I gave them a year of Sundays and holidays and family events. I gave them enthusiasm and gratitude and constant efforts to prove I belonged. I gave them my whole heart, wrapped up in the desperate hope that they'd give me theirs in return. Which brings me back to that Thanksgiving dinner, the one that changed everything. It was supposed to be our first Thanksgiving as a married couple, and I was so excited. I'd been planning for weeks, coordinating with Patricia about what to bring, asking about family traditions I should know about. This was going to be my chance to really show them how much I valued being part of their family. I spent the entire morning cooking my grandmother's, my foster grandmother's, famous sweet potato casserole. Elena Martinez had taken me in when I was 16, and though I was only with her for 2 years before she passed, she'd given me the closest thing to family recipes I'd ever had. I wanted to share that with the Richardsons, to contribute something meaningful to their table. The kitchen in the main house was buzzing with activity when I arrived. Patricia was orchestrating everything like a conductor, with Caroline and David's wife Sarah following her orders precisely. Everyone had their assigned dishes, their traditional contributions. "Oh, Elena, how lovely," Patricia said when she saw my casserole. "We can put this on the side table with the other extras." Extras. My contribution was relegated to the extras table while the real family dishes took center stage. But I smiled and nodded, reminding myself that these things took time. Next year would be different. The dining room looked like something out of a magazine, crystal glasses catching the candlelight, fine china that had been in the family for generations, everything perfectly coordinated. I helped set the table, careful with pieces that were probably worth more than I'd made in a year at the community center. As everyone gathered, I felt that familiar warmth of being surrounded by family. Marcus pulled out my chair, kissing my cheek as I sat down. William said grace, thanking God for family and blessings and another year of prosperity. Everything felt normal, traditional, perfect. Until it didn't. Chapter 2, The Mask Slips. The conversation started innocently enough. We were talking about holiday plans, who would host Christmas, the usual logistics of large family gatherings. I was half listening, focused on how good it felt to be part of these discussions, to have my opinion matter in family decisions. "Elena and I were thinking of starting our own tradition," Marcus said, reaching for my hand. "Maybe hosting Christmas Eve at our place this year, something smaller and more intimate." The silence that followed was subtle but unmistakable. Patricia set down her fork with just a little too much precision. Caroline exchanged a glance with David that lasted a fraction too long. How lovely, Patricia said finally, her voice carrying that particular tone I was beginning to recognize, the one that sounded supportive but felt dismissive. Though of course, Christmas Eve has always been here. It's tradition. I know, Mom, but Elena and I thought. Elena thought, Caroline interrupted, and there was something in her voice I'd never heard before. Something sharp. Elena thinks she can just waltz in here and change everything we've been doing for decades. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus's hand tightened on mine. Caroline, he said in a warning tone. What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Caroline's face was flushed, whether from wine or anger, I couldn't tell. She's been here for what, 2 years? And suddenly she's an expert on Richardson family traditions? Caroline, that's enough, William said firmly, but his wife was already nodding along. She has a point, though, Patricia said, and my heart started racing. Some traditions are sacred, Elena. They're what make a family. A family. I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. The warm, loving woman who'd called me daughter was looking at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into their home uninvited. I wasn't trying to change anything, I said quietly. I just thought. You thought wrong, David said, speaking up for the first time. This family has survived and thrived for 5 generations by maintaining certain standards. Certain boundaries. Standards. Boundaries. The words hit me like physical blows. Marcus was trying to mediate, his voice getting more strained by the minute. Look, we can talk about this later. Let's just enjoy dinner. But Caroline wasn't done. The wine had loosened her tongue, and years of resentment were spilling out like water through a broken dam. You know what really bothers me? She said, pointing her fork at me. You act like you're so grateful to be here, like we should feel sorry for you because you don't have a real family. But you're not grateful, you're greedy. You want to take everything that's ours and make it yours. Each word was like a slap. The room was spinning, and I could feel tears threatening, but I fought them back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I started. Yes, you did, Sarah chimed in, emboldened by Caroline's attack. At the wedding, you kept talking about our children and our traditions like you'd been part of this family your whole life. Like you had any right to claim our legacy. Our legacy. Their legacy. Never my legacy. The worst part was Marcus. My husband, the man who'd promised to love and protect me, was just sitting there looking uncomfortable. Not defending me, not shutting this down, just uncomfortable. I think everyone needs to calm down, he said weakly. No, Marcus, Patricia said, and her voice had gone cold in a way I'd never heard before. I think it's time we were honest. All of us. She turned to look at me directly, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood freeze. This wasn't anger or frustration. This was contempt. Pure, undiluted contempt. Elena, dear, she said, and the endearment sounded like poison, you seem to have misunderstood something fundamental about your place in this family. My place. Not my role, not my contribution. My place. You're Marcus's wife, and we respect that. But you're not a Richardson. You'll never be a Richardson. Not really. The words hung in the air like smoke. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, could feel the walls of the dining room closing in around me. Mom, Marcus started. Let me finish, Patricia said sharply. Elena, you come from nothing. No family, no history, no legacy to speak of. And that's fine, not everyone can be born into something meaningful. But you can't just marry into a legacy and expect to inherit it. That's not how it works. Caroline was nodding along enthusiastically. Exactly. You think because you have Marcus's ring, you automatically get everything else? The house, the business, the foundation, the traditions? You have to earn those things. And how exactly do I earn them? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The smile Patricia gave me was the cruelest thing I'd ever seen. You don't, she said simply. Some things aren't for sale, Elena. Some things you have to be born into. That's when David delivered the killing blow. Look, we all like you well enough, he said, cutting into his turkey with surgical precision. You're adequate. But when it comes to the important stuff, the family business, the foundation, the real estate holdings, those are for real family. Blood family. People who understand what it means to carry the Richardson name. Real family. The words echoed in my head like gunshots. Elena's real family, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was going through the motions of defending me, but his heart wasn't in it. Is she? Caroline asked. Because real family doesn't try to change everything the minute they walk in the door. Real family respects the people who built what they're trying to inherit. I was drowning. Sitting in that beautiful dining room, surrounded by people I thought loved me, and I was drowning in the realization that none of it had been real. The warm welcomes, the inclusion in traditions, the talk of my being their daughter, it had all been an act. A performance they put on for Marcus's sake. I think, Patricia said, folding her napkin with deliberate care, that Elena should leave the table. This is a conversation for real family. The room went dead silent. Even Caroline looked shocked that her mother had gone that far. Marcus was staring at his plate like it held the answers to the universe. My husband, who should have been on his feet defending me, was studying the pattern on his grandmother's china. Leave the table? I repeated, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Yes, dear, Patricia said, her tone now sickeningly sweet. Why don't you go for a walk? Get some fresh air? We'll save you some dessert. They wanted me gone. After 2 years of pretending to welcome me, of calling me family, they wanted me to leave so they could have their real family conversation without the contamination of my presence. I looked around the table one more time. At Caroline, who couldn't meet my eyes. At David, who was still calmly eating. At Sarah, who was scrolling through her phone like nothing was happening. At William, who was staring out the window. At Marcus, who finally looked up from his plate but couldn't hold my gaze for more than a second. Okay, I said quietly, standing up from the table. I'll leave. I walked out of that dining room with as much dignity as I could muster, my head high despite the tears threatening to spill over. Behind me, I could hear the conversation resuming, voices getting warmer and more animated now that the outsider had been removed. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to them laugh about something, probably me, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, exactly. Crack. Like the sound ice makes just before it shatters completely. That's when I noticed something I'd walked past hundreds of times but never really seen. On the wall next to the staircase was a framed copy of William Richardson's will, displayed like a piece of art. It was a family tradition, apparently, each generation displayed their will as a testament to their stewardship of the family legacy. I'd never bothered to read it before. Why would I? It wasn't my business, wasn't my concern. I was just the daughter-in-law, the addition to the family, not someone who would be directly affected by such things. But now, standing in that hallway with their words echoing in my ears, I found myself really looking at it for the first time. And what I saw changed everything. Chapter 3, The Revelation. My hands were shaking as I read the document hanging on the wall. It was dated just 6 months ago, well after Marcus and I were married. The language was dense and legal, but certain phrases jumped out at me like neon signs. To my beloved daughter-in-law, Elena Maria Vasquez Richardson. In recognition of her unwavering devotion to this family. The Lincoln Park property, including all buildings and grounds, to be held in trust. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. William Richardson had left me the family house. Not Marcus. Not Caroline or David. Me. The same house where I'd just been told I didn't belong. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it in the dining room. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of every page, my hands trembling so badly I had to retake several shots. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of error or placeholder document. Why would William leave me the family home when his own family clearly saw me as an outsider? I was so absorbed in reading that I didn't hear footsteps on the stairs behind me. Interesting reading? I spun around to find William Richardson watching me, his expression unreadable. He looked older than usual, tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. I'm sorry, I stammered. I didn't mean to pry, I was just running away from my family's cruelty? He said quietly. Can't say I blame you. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. From the dining room, I could hear laughter and animated conversation, the kind of warmth and connection I thought I was part of. Is it real? I asked finally, gesturing to the framed will. William nodded slowly. Updated it 6 months ago. Had my lawyer draw up new papers after watching how you handled yourself at Marcus's cousin's funeral. I remembered that day. Marcus's cousin Jeremy had died in a car accident, leaving behind a wife and 2 young children. The family had rallied around them, but in their grief, they'd overlooked practical details. I quietly organized meals, arranged childcare, and helped Jeremy's widow navigate insurance paperwork, not because anyone asked me to, but because it needed to be done. You didn't make a big show of it, William continued. Didn't announce what you were doing or expect praise. You just saw people hurting and helped. That told me everything I needed to know about your character. But your family. My family, he said with a bitter laugh, has forgotten what character looks like. They've been so focused on protecting their inheritance that they've lost sight of what makes someone worthy of one. He gestured toward the dining room, where Caroline's voice was carrying over the others in some animated story. You want to know what they're talking about in there right now? They're discussing how to manage you. How to keep you satisfied with scraps while ensuring you never get access to anything that really matters. Patricia's been planning this conversation for months. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Months? She was terrified that Marcus might actually put you in his will, might give you real power in the family businesses. So she decided to clarify your position before that could happen. I felt sick. All those lunches, all those heart-to-heart conversations about family and legacy, it had all been reconnaissance. Patricia gathering intelligence on how much I knew, how much I wanted, how big a threat I might pose to their plans. Why are you telling me this? I asked. William was quiet for a long moment, studying the family portraits that lined the hallway. 5 generations of Richardsons stared back at us with identical expressions of prosperity and self-satisfaction. Do you know what my grandfather told me when I was young? He said finally. He said that wealth without character is just expensive poverty. That you can have all the money in the world and still be the poorest person in the room if you don't know how to treat people with dignity. He pointed to a particular portrait, a stern-looking man in an old-fashioned suit. That's him. Built this family's fortune from nothing, just like you're building your life from nothing. He'd be ashamed of what his great-grandchildren have become. Ashamed of how they're treating someone who's shown more integrity in 2 years than they've shown in decades. So you left me the house out of spite? I asked. I left you the house because you're the only one in this family who understands what it means to take care of people, William said. The only one who sees this place as a home instead of just an asset to be managed. From the dining room came the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. Dinner was winding down, which meant they'd be looking for me soon. Patricia would want to smooth things over, to ensure I didn't make waves that might complicate their long-term plans. They can't know about this, William said urgently. Not yet. There are other changes I need to make, other documents to update. If they knew now. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I could imagine the chaos that would ensue if Patricia discovered her carefully laid plans had been completely undermined. How long? I asked. Give me 2 weeks. My lawyer's already working on revising the business documents and the foundation bylaws. By Christmas, everything will be locked in place. 2 weeks of pretending everything was normal. 2 weeks of sitting through family dinners and listening to them discuss my place in their hierarchy. 2 weeks of watching Marcus say nothing while his family slowly froze me out. I don't know if I can do this, I whispered. William reached out and squeezed my shoulder, the first genuine affection I'd felt from any of them all evening. You're stronger than you know, Elena. You survived foster care, put yourself through college, built a life from nothing. You can survive 2 more weeks of my family's nonsense. Elena? Marcus's voice called from the dining room. Where did you go? William and I exchanged a look. The performance had to continue. Remember, he said quietly. 2 weeks. I walked back into that dining room with my head held high, my face composed into a mask of calm acceptance. They were all watching me, waiting to see if I'd been properly chastened by their little intervention. There you are, darling, Patricia said with false warmth. We saved you some pie. How thoughtful, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Marcus pulled me close as I sat down, and I let him, even though his touch now felt like a betrayal. He'd sat there and let them tear me apart. He'd said nothing while his mother told me I wasn't real family. He'd allowed them to dismiss me from my own seat at what I thought was my own family's table. I'm sorry about earlier, he whispered in my ear. They're just set in their ways. Give them time. Time. Everyone wanted me to give them time while they figured out how little they could get away with giving me in return. Of course, I said, forcing a smile. I understand. But I didn't understand. Not the way he meant. What I understood was that I'd been living a lie for 2 years. What I understood was that every kindness, every inclusion, every moment of seeming acceptance had been carefully calculated to manage me, not welcome me. What I understood was that in 2 weeks, the game would change completely. And they had no idea what was coming. Chapter 4, The Reckoning. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of being a grateful daughter-in-law while every interaction felt like a lie. Patricia would call with invitations to lunch, speaking to me in that patronizing tone I now recognized for what it was. Caroline would make subtle digs about knowing your place whenever we crossed paths. David would ask pointed questions about my career plans, clearly trying to determine if I had any ambitions that might conflict with theirs. And Marcus. Marcus acted like nothing had happened. Like his family hadn't just told me I wasn't really part of it. Like he hadn't sat there in silence while they systematically destroyed my sense of belonging. You've been quiet lately, he said one evening as we were getting ready for bed. Everything okay? Everything okay. My husband was asking if everything was okay after watching his family eviscerate me at the dinner table. Just tired, I said, brushing my teeth with more force than necessary. You know they didn't mean anything by it, right? The stuff at Thanksgiving? He was using that tone people use when they're trying to convince themselves as much as you. They're just protective of family traditions. It's not personal. Not personal. Being told you're not real family isn't personal. I know, I lied. But I was learning things. Things that William's revelation had unlocked in my memory. Like how Patricia always seated me at the far end of the table during family dinners, close enough to seem included, far enough to be easily excluded from important conversations. How Caroline and David's children called me Aunt Elena with a reluctance that suggested coaching. How family photos were always arranged so that the real family was centered, with me standing slightly apart. I'd attributed it all to my own insecurity, my own unfamiliarity with family dynamics. But now I saw it for what it was, a carefully orchestrated campaign to keep me in my place. 3 days before Christmas, William called me. It's done, he said simply. Everything's finalized. The new will, the trust documents, the foundation bylaws. My lawyer has copies, and there are sealed envelopes for each family member to be opened at the Christmas Eve gathering. Christmas Eve. The sacred Richardson tradition that I'd supposedly been trying to destroy with my suggestion of hosting at our apartment. Are you sure about this? I asked. Once those envelopes are opened. There's no going back, William finished. Elena, I've had 73 years to figure out what really matters. These last 2 weeks, watching how they've treated you, have only confirmed that I made the right choice. That evening, Marcus came home excited about Christmas Eve plans. Mom wants to make it extra special this year, he said, loosening his tie. She's inviting some extended family, making it a really big celebration. She said something about it being a year of clarification for the family. Clarification. Patricia was planning to use Christmas Eve to formally establish the family hierarchy, to make sure everyone understood exactly where I stood in the Richardson pecking order. She probably had a whole speech planned about traditions and blood and knowing your place. If only she knew what William had planned instead. Christmas Eve arrived gray and cold, with the kind of bitter wind that cuts right through your coat. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing a deep red dress that Marcus had bought me for our anniversary, the one that made me feel beautiful and confident. If this was going to be my last Richardson family gathering, I wanted to look like someone who belonged there. The house was decorated like something out of a magazine. Patricia had outdone herself with garlands and lights and enough poinsettias to stock a nursery. The dining room table was set with the finest china, crystal glasses catching the light from an enormous chandelier. Everything perfect, everything designed to impress and intimidate. The extended family was already there when we arrived, aunts and uncles and cousins I'd met at various gatherings over the years. They greeted me with the same polite distance they always had, like I was a pleasant enough stranger who happened to be married to their nephew. William was in his study, Patricia announced, handling some last-minute business matters. You know how he is about his paperwork. I knew exactly what paperwork he was handling. Dinner was elaborate and formal, with Patricia orchestrating every course like a conductor leading a symphony. The conversation was carefully guided away from anything too personal or controversial. This was meant to be a celebration, after all. A demonstration of Richardson family unity and tradition. It wasn't until dessert was served that Patricia rose from her seat, wine glass in hand. If I could have everyone's attention, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant important family business was about to be discussed. I wanted to take a moment to talk about what this year has meant for our family. Here it comes, I thought. The speech about clarification and boundaries and knowing your place. We've had some adjustments to make, Patricia continued, her eyes finding mine across the table. Some conversations that needed to happen about roles and expectations within the family structure. Several people were nodding along. They all knew exactly what this was about. Change is never easy, she went on, but it's important that everyone understands their position in the family hierarchy. Some people are born to leadership, and others. She smiled at me with false sweetness. Others support that leadership in their own way. Marcus was staring at his dessert plate. Again. Always looking away when his family put me in my place. Which is why, Patricia said, building to her crescendo, I think it's so important that we clarify. Actually, William's voice cut through her speech like a knife, I think tonight is perfect for clarification. He was standing in the doorway, holding a stack of cream-colored envelopes. His expression was calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Patricia's face went through several interesting changes as she realized her moment had been hijacked. William, dear, You were just about to sit down so I could distribute these, he said firmly. Christmas gifts for the whole family. He began walking around the table, placing an envelope beside each person's plate. When he got to me, he squeezed my shoulder gently, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. What are these, Grandpa? Caroline asked, already reaching for hers. Legal documents, William said matter-of-factly. Updates to various family trusts and arrangements. I thought it was time everyone knew exactly where they stood. Patricia had gone very pale. William, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No more private discussions, William said. No more managing information or controlling narratives. Everyone deserves to know the truth. He returned to his seat and looked around the table. Please, everyone open your envelopes. The sound of tearing paper filled the dining room. I watched faces change as people absorbed the contents of their letters. Confusion gave way to shock, shock to anger, anger to something approaching panic. Caroline was the first to speak. This has to be a mistake, she said, her voice shaking. Dad, this says that Elena gets the house. The entire property. All eyes turned to me. I felt like I was in the center of a spotlight, every face around the table studying me with new understanding. It's not a mistake, William said calmly. Elena will inherit the Lincoln Park property upon my death, along with a controlling interest in the Richardson Foundation. The explosion of voices was immediate. Everyone talking at once, demanding explanations, protesting the unfairness, questioning William's mental state. Patricia was on her feet, her carefully orchestrated evening dissolving into chaos. You can't do this, David shouted over the noise. She's not even really family. She's more family than any of you have been lately, William replied, his voice cutting through the din. Elena has shown more care for this family's well-being in 2 years than the rest of you have in decades. Care? Caroline's voice was climbing toward hysteria. She's been planning this. Manipulating you, playing the poor little foster child card to get sympathy. Enough. William's voice cracked like a whip. Elena doesn't even know I was planning this. She found out the same time as everyone else. That wasn't entirely true, but close enough. I certainly hadn't manipulated him into this decision. Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Elena, he said slowly, did you know about this? The question hung in the air like smoke. Everyone was waiting for my answer, and I realized this was the moment everything would change forever. I could lie, could claim ignorance, could try to smooth things over and maintain the peace. Or I could tell the truth. I found out 2 weeks ago, I said quietly. The night you all told me to leave the table for real family. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's face had gone from pale to ashen. 2 weeks ago? Marcus repeated. And you didn't tell me? Tell you what? I asked, finding my voice getting stronger. That your grandfather thought I deserved basic respect? That he noticed how your family treats me? What exactly should I have told you, Marcus? You should have told me my father was losing his mind, Patricia snapped. Giving away family property to some what? I asked, standing up from my chair. Some orphan? Some nobody? Some girl who doesn't know her place? The mask was finally off. 2 years of pretending to be grateful, pretending to be satisfied with scraps, pretending not to notice their subtle cruelties, it was all over now. You want to talk about family? I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. Let me tell you about family. Family doesn't make you feel like you have to earn love. Family doesn't seat you at the children's table of your own life. Family doesn't whisper about you in corners and then smile to your face. Elena, please, Marcus said, reaching for my arm. Let's just calm down and... No, I said, pulling away from him. I'm done calming down. I'm done being reasonable. I'm done pretending that being married to you automatically makes me part of this family when clearly, it doesn't. I looked around the table at all of them, these people I tried so hard to please, to impress, to love. You know what the saddest part is? I said. I would have been happy with nothing. If you had just treated me with basic kindness, if you had just let me feel like I belonged somewhere, I would have been grateful for the rest of my life. But that wasn't enough for you, was it? You needed to make sure I knew exactly how little I mattered. Caroline was crying now, but not from sadness, from rage. You manipulated him, she said through her tears. You played up the poor little orphan story and manipulated a grieving old man. Your grandfather isn't grieving, I said. He's disgusted. He's disgusted by what his family has become, and honestly, so am I. I turned to Marcus, my husband who had sat silently through 2 years of his family's subtle abuse. You knew, I said. Maybe not consciously, but you knew. You knew how they talked to me, how they excluded me, how they made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. And you did nothing. That's not fair, Marcus said weakly. I always defended you. No, you didn't, I said. You made excuses for them. You told me to give them time, to be patient, to understand their perspective. You never once told them to treat me better. You never once made it clear that disrespecting me meant disrespecting you. The truth of it was written all over his face. He knew I was right. Elena, Patricia said, trying to regain control of the situation, you're upset, and I understand why. But family businesses, family properties, these things are complicated. They require careful management by people who understand. People who understand what? I interrupted. How to exclude. How to manipulate. How to make someone feel grateful for crumbs while you hoard the feast. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken of Williamsville that night 2 weeks ago. You want to know something interesting? I said, showing them the screen. This will is dated 6 months after my wedding. You know what else happened 6 months after my wedding? Jeremy's funeral. When I spent 3 days organizing meals and childcare and insurance paperwork while the rest of you argued about flower arrangements. I looked directly at Patricia. That's when William decided I was real family. Not when I married Marcus, not when I tried to fit into your traditions, but when I proved I could take care of people without expecting anything in return. So what now? David asked, his voice bitter. You're going to kick us all out of our own family home? Your family home? I repeated. The home where I was just told I don't belong? The home where I've been treated like a guest for 2 years? I looked around the table one more time at all these people who had made me feel so small, so unwelcome, so wrong for wanting to belong somewhere. You're right about one thing, I said. I'm not a Richardson. I never was, and I never will be. But you know what? I'm okay with that now. Because if being a Richardson means being the kind of people who would treat someone the way you've treated me, then I don't want any part of it. I walked toward the door, then turned back. The house will be sold, I said. Every penny will go to the Richardson Foundation, which I'll be restructuring to focus on foster care and family services. You want to talk about legacy? Let's make sure this family's legacy is about taking care of people who have nowhere else to go. You can't do that, Caroline shrieked. That house has been in our family for generations. And now it's going to help families that actually need it, I said. Families like the one I never had. Families like the ones I work with every day at the community center. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spent 2 years trying to convince me I wasn't good enough for their family, and now their family's legacy would be devoted to helping people exactly like me. Marcus stood up, his face stricken. Elena, wait. Please. We can work this out. We can fix this. Fix what, Marcus? I asked. Your family's attitude? Your silence? The fact that you've spent 2 years letting them treat me like I should be grateful for the privilege of their tolerance? I love you, he said desperately. I know you do, I replied, and I meant it. But love isn't enough when it comes without respect. Love isn't enough when it comes with conditions and asterisks and clauses about knowing your place. I walked to where William was sitting, still calm in the center of the storm he'd created. Thank you, I said quietly. Not for the house or the money, but for seeing me as family when no one else would. He squeezed my hand. You were always family, Elena. They just forgot what that word means. I left them there in that beautiful dining room, surrounded by their fine china and family portraits and generations of tradition. Left them to figure out how to rebuild their lives without the safety net they'd always taken for granted. As I walked out of that house for the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: relief. The desperate need to belong somewhere, to be claimed by someone, to be part of something bigger than myself. It was finally gone. I didn't need their acceptance anymore. I didn't need their love or their approval or their inclusion in their precious traditions. What I needed was to build my own family. My own traditions. My own legacy. And that's exactly what I did. Epilogue, 5 years later. I'm writing this from my office at the Richardson Family Center, a residential facility for aged-out foster youth that we opened 3 years ago. The irony of the name still makes me smile sometimes. Patricia would absolutely hate that the Richardson name is now associated with helping people like me. The divorce was finalized within 6 months. Marcus tried to fight for half of the inheritance, but William had been very thorough in his legal preparations. The prenup his family had insisted on, the one designed to protect their assets from me, ended up protecting my assets from them. Marcus remarried last year to a woman from another old Chicago family. Someone who fits their definition of real family. I heard through mutual friends that Patricia loves her new daughter-in-law, that she's everything they wanted me to be. I'm genuinely happy for them. We all deserve to be with people who see us as good enough exactly as we are. The Richardson Foundation now operates 12 facilities across 3 states, all focused on supporting young people aging out of foster care. We provide housing, job training, college support, and most importantly, the kind of family-style support system that helps people build their own definitions of belonging. William lived to see the first facility open. He cut the ribbon himself, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. This is what the Richardson name should mean, he told me that day. Taking care of people who need it most. He passed peacefully in his sleep 2 months later, surrounded by the chosen family he'd helped me create, former foster kids who'd become our first success stories, staff members who'd become like siblings to me, and yes, the man I eventually married. David is a teacher at one of our facilities. Not David Richardson, David Martinez, a former foster kid himself who understands what it means to age out of the system with nothing but determination and hope. He proposed to me in the garden behind our first facility, surrounded by kids who were learning that family isn't about blood or inheritance or knowing your place. Family is about choosing to show up for each other, again and again, even when it's hard. We're expecting our first child in the spring. A little girl who will grow up knowing she's loved unconditionally, knowing she belongs exactly as she is, knowing that family is something you build with intention and care. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how everything happened. If I wish I could have found a way to make it work with the Richardsons, to bridge that gap between their world and mine. The answer is no. Because sitting in that dining room 2 years ago, being told to leave the table for real family, was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to stop trying to squeeze myself into spaces where I wasn't wanted and start creating spaces where everyone is welcome. The Richardson family wanted to teach me about knowing my place. They succeeded. My place isn't at their table, begging for scraps of belonging. My place is at the head of my own table, serving a feast to anyone who needs a home. And there's always room for one more chair.